William Shakespeare was born in this house on Henley Street on the 23rd of April 1564. Or was he? The first of Shakespeare's Stratford secrets is based on speculation that his true birthplace was a couple of miles away, in the hamlet of Clifford Chambers. In the archives of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust are some remarkable records that shed some light on life in Elizabethan Stratford. The language has been modernised to make the records more understandable, but the details have been copied accurately. This entry is from 1564, the year of Shakespeare's birth.
The plague eventually arrived in Stratford, and before the end of the year, over 200 people had been buried, about 1/5 of the population of the town.
Another entry in the archive tells us,
only a few families like John Shakespeare's have escaped this epidemic entirely. His son, William, born in April, is still alive.
The rectory at Clifford Chambers was used as a refuge by Stratford's well-to-do during times of plague. William's parents had already lost 2 children to the disease, and as his father John was a prominent alderman of the town, it's entirely plausible that he would send his pregnant wife to the refuge of Clifford's old rectory. While some have questioned the place of his birth, there's little doubt that Shakespeare grew up in this house, and it now attracts many thousands of visitors from all over the world. The ancient records also provide some fascinating glimpses into Shakespeare's early life and indicate that his father may have unwittingly sparked William's interest in the theatre.
An interesting development during John Shakespeare's term as town bailiff has been the encouragement of travelling players who visit the town from time to time. In August, the Queen's Players were here and gave a performance before the bailiff and corporation in the Guildhall, for which they were paid 9 shillings. Let's hope that this patronage will continue, as these visits certainly help to liven up the town a little. Shakespeare Jr., it seems, was hooked. Oh, too often, William is found to be hanging round the Guildhall watching the travelling players, and, as expected, he took part in Davy Jones's amateur theatricals at Whitsun.
Another source of inspiration came from the Forest of Arden that swathed most of Warwickshire. To the pagans who lived here thousands of years ago, it was a magical place. It was home to the Waldgeist, the woodland spirit, custodian of the forest and the protector of those who walked within it. Woodsmen and hunters entering the forest knocked on an oak tree to awaken the Waldgeist to protect them from the vast array of malevolent or impish spirits that also dwelled here. Determined missionaries gradually persuaded the Saxons to embrace Christianity. When the King of Mercia converted early in the 8th century, he allowed missionaries to spread the word amongst his people, and in the churchyard at Stratford-upon-Avon is a fascinating relic from this period. The holy men erected stone crosses, often on old pagan sites, where the local people would gather to learn of this strange new religion. The old ways were not forgotten completely. Country people maintained a cautious respect for the old pagan gods, which manifested itself in a host of superstitions, some of which persist to this day. For example, when we knock on wood for luck, we're repeating the practice of our pagan ancestors who were evoking the Waldgeist for protection against evil. The Waldgeist was usually depicted as a carved face with leaves and twigs for hair and beard, an image that may well sound familiar. Better known to us as the Green Man, the Waldgeist appears all over Warwickshire, on cottages, even on churches, and has given his name to a number of pubs. Stratford's most famous son, William Shakespeare, would have been entirely familiar with the ancient beliefs and customs that surrounded him, and drew on them heavily in many of his works. In Warwickshire, to be mabbled was to be led astray by Will-o'-the-Wisp. Shakespeare recalled this piece of local folklore in Romeo and Juliet, when Mercutio jests with Romeo that Mab, the fairy queen and bringer of dreams, has visited his lovesick friend. Forest spirits feature prominently in A Midsummer Night's Dream, with the impish elf Puck making considerable mischief. A number of years ago, the Old Broom Tavern sign showed that the bard was quite capable of making mischief of his own. It showed him fast asleep underneath a crabapple tree and was said to recall the aftermath of a drinking competition between a team from Stratford, including Shakespeare, and the Sippers from Bidford. The Stratford team was soundly thrashed and on their way home fell asleep under the tree. When they awoke, one of their group suggested resuming the contest, but Shakespeare declined with typical eloquence. "No, I have drunk with piping Pebworth, dancing Marston, haunted Hilborough, hungry Grafton, dudging Exhall, papist Wixford, beggarly Broom, and drunken Bidford. I can drink no more." Piping Pebworth and dancing Marston is a reference to their once renowned Morris dancers. Hilborough was associated with several ghost stories. Dudging, applied to Exhall, is thought to mean ill-humoured. Temple Grafton had poor soil, which made growing crops difficult. Hence, its folk were hungry. Beggarly Broom had many squatters. Papist Wixford was home to many well-known Catholics, and Bidford was renowned for its large number of pubs and the drinking capacity of its inhabitants. They have since been known as the Shakespeare Villages. Another of Shakespeare's Stratford secrets comes from gossip recorded at the time of his wedding.
Of the marriages this year, the gossip's favourite has been Anne Hathaway's. With a small dowry, she could not hope for much, and so she has married William, the 18-year-old son of the luckless John Shakespeare. Once our High Bailiff, he has fallen on very hard times and is beset by all sorts of trouble. The marriage was rather a hasty one, as they're expecting their first child in May, but let us hope that, being 8 years older than William, she will bring a steadying influence to bear.
But there's a mystery surrounding Shakespeare's marriage to Anne Hathaway that has perplexed historians for more than a century. In the late 19th century, the Reverend T.P. Whatley discovered an entry in the Worcester Cathedral records showing that on the 27th of November 1582, a licence was issued to William Shakespeare to marry Anne Whately of Temple Grafton. The following day, this licence appears to have been revoked when two yeomen from Shottery came to Worcester and insisted that Shakespeare was already betrothed to Anne Hathaway. So who was this other Anne? Some claim that Whately was simply a misspelling of Hathaway and that they are one and the same. The documentary evidence, though, suggests that they were, in fact, different people, which has led to no end of speculation. The most popular theory is that Anne Whately lived at Hilborough Manor, near Temple Grafton, where young William met and fell madly in love with her. But he had already wooed Anne Hathaway of Shottery, who was carrying his child. The Hathaway family insisted that the wayward Will marry their Anne, and so he was forced to forsake his true love. The broken-hearted Anne Whately fled to Italy to grieve for her lost paramour. But according to some accounts, that wasn't the end of the romance. Shakespeare's fascination for the theatre led him to London, and there's evidence that Anne Whately shows up in London at about the same time. It claimed that her knowledge of Italy was used in Shakespeare's Italian plays, and that she inspired some of his female characters. More dramatically, it has even been suggested that she was the true author of Shakespeare's works. Whether it was with or without Anne Whately's influence, William Shakespeare found fame and fortune in London and returned to Stratford a rich man. He became one of the wealthiest landowners in the area and bought New Place, the second biggest house in Stratford, from William Underhill, who also owned the Idlicott estate. The acquisition was a prestigious one for Shakespeare, but the deal proved catastrophic for the Underhill family. William Underhill's eldest son, Fulke, was so enraged at the disposal of his inheritance that he poisoned his father. Fulke Underhill was convicted of murder and subsequently executed at Warwick. Some of Shakespeare's haunting inspiration can be found just outside Old Stratford in Clopton. It's thought that William Shakespeare was a regular visitor to Clopton House. Their mansion in Clopton Park is now residential apartments, but we have some fascinating memories of the old house left behind by the Victorian author Elizabeth Gaskell, who visited Clopton in 1825.
One of the bedrooms is said to be haunted, and with its close, pent-up atmosphere and the long shadows of evening creeping on, gave me an eerie feeling. On the wall, there hung a portrait so singularly beautiful. A sweet-looking girl, with pale gold hair and with eyes that looked like violets filled with dew. For there was the glittering of unshed tears before their deep dark blue. And that was the likeness of Charlotte Clopton, about whom there was so fearful a legend told at Stratford Church. In the time of an epidemic of the plague, this young girl had sickened, and to all appearance died. She was buried with fearful haste in the vaults of Clopton Chapel, attached to Stratford Church, but the sickness was not stayed. In a few days another of the Cloptons died, and him too they bore to the ancestral vault. But as they descended the gloomy stairs, they saw by the torchlight Charlotte Clopton in her grave clothes leaning against the wall, and when they looked nearer, she was indeed dead, but not before, in the agonies of despair and hunger, she had bitten a piece from her white round shoulder. The poor girl, it appeared, had been buried alive. Of course, she has walked ever since and is said to haunt Charlotte's chamber in Clopton Hall. Behind the house, in a hollow, now wild, damp, and overgrown with elder bushes, was a well called Margaret's Well, for there had a maiden of the house of that name drowned herself after being abandoned by her lover.
It's thought that Margaret Clopton's death inspired Shakespeare to create the character of Ophelia, who in Hamlet is driven out of her mind and drowns herself. As it turned out, Shakespeare's end at the age of 52 was also tragically untimely. On the 22nd of April 1616, a group of friends, including writers Michael Drayton and Ben Jonson, gathered at his house at New Place to celebrate his 52nd birthday. It was to be his last.
The vicar of Stratford later wrote, "Shakespeare, Drayton and Ben Jonson had a merry meeting, and it seems drank too hard, for Shakespeare died of a fever there contracted." 4 centuries later, the party's still going on.
Every year, on the day he was born and died, Stratford celebrates the world's best-known poet.
It's testament to the enduring genius of Shakespeare that millions of people from all over the world now flock to his hometown.
Although he made his name in London, he chose to spend his last days in the country town of his birth. And instead of a resplendent tomb in some great cathedral, was happy with a modest grave in the church where he was baptized.
So, on the 23rd of April each year, the townspeople may be excused for thinking of William Shakespeare first and foremost as one of their own, a son of Stratford